For those of you following along with these videos, let's get to the wheel. Card number 10, really of course in sequence, card number 11. One of my favorites, and you're looking at the beginning of this symbol in tarot symbolism. The original designer or designers of the tarot sequence felt that this is an image worth using. Why and where did they get it from? First, we'll look at the Marseille version of the card. So, significantly different but consistent with what we just saw, right? There's a wheel with creatures on it, but now they're anthropomorphized animals instead of people, and importantly, there's no one turning the wheel. This was then the standard for centuries until the Rider-Waite-Smith tarot deck established this. And this represents a very significant break. We still have a circular image in the center, but it's hard to say it's even a wheel. If you showed that symbol, the one we're looking at right here in the center of the card, to anybody who didn't know anything about tarot and didn't have the name of the card visible, and you asked them what's that thing in the center, they would not say a wheel. But it kept the creature theme, including the one who kind of seems to be in a position of authority at the apex. And then, of course, it imports all kinds of other creatures, meaning at the four corners, which is clearly taken from a different tarot card. And then there's all kinds of symbols on the actual disc itself. Just a lot going on. As always, a little, well, not always, but as often with that deck, a little too much going on. So let's go to a rendition of the older Marseille pattern while we talk about the wheel itself. It's been around since the dawn of civilization, probably one of the most important inventions of all time, so of course it makes sense that it would get some symbolic import at some point. And as is so often the case with the original tarot symbolism, you have what became a Christian symbol but is actually older and had its own earlier interpretations. For instance, you can see here in this kind of dictionary of symbolism that the wheel often represents the sun and the spokes are the rays. Well, that is not present in the tarot incorporation. Here is a very old petroglyph that includes a wheel symbol showing how deep these roots run. And our next image gives a little bit of history of the wheel, the actual functional thing itself. 4th millennium BC, a long time ago in the cradle of civilization, Mesopotamia. And again, being such an important invention, it's going to have interpretive values. The chariot, which is also a tarot symbol, of course, is the symbol of, authority and success and of conquering. Pharaohs were very often depicted riding one. Think about mythology. This, by the way, some would think of as a tarot card, but it's actually not. The Mantegna Taraci, a closely related set of cards that here in this image show how the movement that the wheel represents was even then kind of stretched to imagine it getting you to or through the sky. And that, of course, existed elsewhere and earlier. This is a Renaissance artifact here, just like tarot. The ancient Greeks with Helios and the chariot going through the sky and pulling the sun and all that. But we're veering a little bit more into the chariot now. Again, it's interesting, this linkage between the wheel and the chariot is something you don't really see remarked upon, I don't think, ever. But the wheel as a symbol would have other practical, real-world reference points for folks, including something like this, which is obviously a watermill, a very important thing, and it predates tarot by, a good 400 years, let's say half a millennium. Go back even further, much further, like 800 years earlier, for the horse mill. And those are just a couple of examples of non-vehicle wheels in daily life and used for very important purposes. So how about on the religious front? Well, interestingly, the visions of Ezekiel had a huge influence on tarot, but not when it comes to the wheel, even though it included a wheel. You're looking at the video I have on the very channel you're watching right now on my copy of this reproduced Renaissance Book of Miracles, and since it's miracles and Judeo-Christian imagery, it of course has Ezekiel's vision, and here is the wheel, or wheels, we're talking about. So his strange prophetic vision included this wheel within a wheel symbol, and probably was a pretty good chance that could have made it into tarot, it just didn't. What it speaks to is, again, how much mythic potential there was in this tool as a symbol, and that meaning it's unsurprising that it ended up in the major arcana sequence. Here's just a really cool work of art by Giovanni Battista from the late 18th century that plays on this symbolic potential of the wheel. And we've stuck to the Near East and West so far, but obviously on the other side of the world, this was noticed and used as well. The wheel is an important, very important Buddhist symbol. We won't go into detail on that because it was not an influence on tarot. I mean, I think it's a clear case of parallel development, at least I would think so. I'm sure there's people who postulate that every foreign, far-flung thought process and religion and esoteric teaching somehow made it into tarot. Now let's get to the specific vision of the wheel that made it into tarot. This is something you can find pretty much countless examples of, looking at a obviously illuminated manuscript, medieval piece of art, and this looks suspiciously familiar, right? Just like the earliest version of the card that we saw. People arranged around the wheel and someone seated in power at the top. And the same dynamic we saw with the Marseille card, where it was creatures, but repeating the same template. This widespread medieval artistic convention is, without question, the predominant influence on the card. And the card, by the way, I don't think I've used the full title for it. You know, it's the Wheel of Fortune. So, who or what is Fortune? It's a little bit more of a who because it's a deity. It's the goddess Fortuna, she who turns the wheel. If you're at the top now, that's great, but life is full of surprises, and you're going to find yourself soon on the bottom, and vice versa. Fortuna was a Roman goddess who, of course, had a Greek predecessor, and I've always thought it was interesting that in both cases it's a woman, and the idea of quote-unquote Lady Luck has lasted all this time, right? People still think of luck, still speak of it in the female sense. Well into modernity and post-modernity, nobody walks into a casino and says, I hope Mr. Luck is good to me tonight. And Frank Sinatra sang about luck be a lady tonight. So we had a goddess and a wheel. Now, if we're looking for someone who really popularized the concept of the wheel as a metaphor, there's a lot of candidates, but the ancient Roman orator Cicero is a good one. He was fond of this metaphor. But he surely wasn't alone. It's just an easy idea to grasp on, right? To use it as a metaphor for ups and downs, the cyclical nature of life, all that good stuff. And Cicero wasn't just a statesman or an orator, he was also a philosopher, and it was a later philosopher who really cemented the archetype of the wheel that made it into the tarot. And that is this man, Boethius. And he, of course, wrote The Consolation of Philosophy, hugely influential work within Christianity. I still remember reading that as an undergrad. And that was a very long time ago. But here's the idea he put out into the world. I'm going to read from themiddleages.net, by the way, that website and their page on the Wheel of Fortune. No, not the tarot card, the medieval symbol that predated tarot. Quote, talking about Boethius, he is comforted by the spirit of philosophy, who tells him that the greatest gifts are not due to fortune, but to other forces, such as the laws of God and nature. So I'm going to break my reading here to say, so you can see the monotheistic Christian, influence on what was an older polytheistic concept. Anyway, fortune's gifts are fleeting and may be withdrawn at any time, because that is her nature. Holding an office will not make a man better, for instance, because, and now they're quoting him, honor is not accorded to virtue because of the office held, but to the office because of the virtue of the holder. And remember that we often, but not always, have an office holder of some kind. It seems like this, person or creature of authority at the top of the wheel. And so the page I'm reading from quoted Boethius directly, but now it gets back to their work. Boethius, speaking through philosophy, provides us with a very visual description of the turning of the wheel. And now back to Boethius's words. Inconstancy is my very essence. It is the game I never cease to play, as I turn my wheel in its ever-changing circle. Filled with joy as I bring the top to the bottom and the bottom to the top. Yes, rise up on my wheel if you like, but don't count it an injury when by the same token you begin to fall, as the rules of the game will require. End quote. TheMiddleAges.net goes on to describe how the wheel was such a common symbol in medieval literature and where else it could be found, but we definitely get the point, and that's why we have so many visual interpretations, like this one here. I really like this one. One thing that's interesting in the evolution of the Wheel of Fortune card is the disappearance of Fortuna, or somebody like her, right? In the kind of Christian-based original tarot symbolism, or the much later, now standard, kind of pagan-based. Either way, this poor woman disappears. And that's unfortunate. She was there from the beginning, and she's an interesting figure. One of the cool visual touches, as seen right here and in our next image, and that she would sometimes, if not often, be drawn in this two-tone manner. I think that's really neat, and again, up, down, good luck, bad luck, day, night, that kind of a thing. A lot of possibilities there symbolically, and too bad that was lost. And there are already a lot of deific women in the Major Arcana sequence, so there is that, but I think she would have been a really cool addition. Well, not addition, because she was there from the beginning. Now let's talk about one more kind of wheel. Just to be thorough, and as a history nerd, I have to point out there's another kind of wheel that absolutely would have stood out into a lot of people's minds in the early centuries of tarot use, and that's the torture device, the wheel. The dreaded wheel. Certainly if they were going to put you on it, you did not want to be on there. Called the breaking wheel, or the execution wheel, or the wheel of Catherine, and also just the wheel. This was a very popular method of torture and execution in Europe. It even went back to well before the Middle Ages. So this being such an unforgettable thing, and you know how it was in the old days, hey, let's go watch someone get executed because, you know, we're bored peasants, what else is there to do? This is a very shocking and unforgettable image. You know, anything like this, especially, and again, people would have seen this in real life. So could something that arresting and unforgettable really have not made it into the tarot symbolism? I love that this card maker here incorporated it in, but it doesn't seem like that's the case. No, you know, a symbol can have more than one meaning, of course, and it seems like this one, here it is being used in hell, just didn't really influence the tarot's creators. But I have to think it's a possibility that in early tarot divination use, that might have come into play, because again, it was such a well-known and arresting version of using the wheel. And remember, we know practically nothing about how the cards were actually used for centuries in terms of divination. Everything we do know and all the rules and, oh, this means this and this symbol means this, all of that exists today was basically made up centuries and centuries later by the modern occultists who created tarot lore and who, this is just a historical fact, were not really interested in doing research. They were interested in imposing upon this artifact whatever they wanted. So, you know, Egyptian mysticism, the Kabbalah, you name it, astrology. Great job by the artist here, who stuck to the main themes and elements but came up with something pretty novel, with the wheel being horizontal and above Fortuna. So back to the torture aspect, if nothing else, it's not fun to go through bad luck, and remember that the wheel represented good luck and bad luck. So if you're going through a tough time in life, let's say you were in the, I don't know, 1600s, and you're getting your cards read, and you see the wheel, and you're thinking about the ups and downs, well, you might absolutely make the torture association, and who knows, maybe some of the people interpreting the cards for others back then did as well. But its main interpretation was clear. Lady Luck, Fortuna, the unpredictability of life. And as the gallery of images I'm rifling through at this point show, this was a very potent symbol overall in the Western world, the wheel. And as you can imagine here, starting in our next image, we're going to rip through a variety of modern interpretations of the wheel, and they run the gamut from, you know, faithful, slightly faithful, or completely imaginative and off-book. Whatever the artist in question chose to go for. And that is it for this video. One more card, not this one, which I like, but this one. Thanks for watching. Bye.